Well, thank you all for joining me here. I'm going to tell a story here, but hopefully, and it might even be an epic story that we can tell our grandchildren. I hope it's not quite like the Odyssey, which my Latin teacher described as one of the first and longest recorded. Gee, honey, I was late for dinner, but you wouldn't believe what happened on my way here, kind of story. But we're going to talk about solar plus storage, green homes, and how we can turn those into a way to overcome our problems with outages in a way that's equitable, affordable, and reliable and resilient. But we'll get into some of the details on that as we go. But I'll also be making a case here for something, maybe a new thing to some and maybe not so to others. A couple of new things. One is aggregating these distributed energy resources, as they're called. So whether it's your solar panels or your battery or even your thermostat now, we have the technology available. We've had it for some time to manage these, and simply they've been done as demand response programs. You probably have already seen the thermostat programs that Excel has, but now there's a more powerful new tool called the virtual power plant. It's a way to simulate a actual power plant, but using all of your devices managed together. And then one of the things that's key about that is making sure that these are managed strategically, that they're planned and placed strategically. Right now, that's kind of just done ad hoc. It's done haphazard. We want to avoid that, and so one of the things I'm going to talk about is the sustainable energy utility model, one that's been, maybe some of you have heard, brought up by Ann Arbor, Michigan, but that model is not new, and we'll get into some of that later. As far as a short background here, I am an electrical engineer. I'm not a lawyer. I spent decades mostly in the medical device development field, so I've developed everything from what's called a cavitational surgical, ultrasonic surgical aspirator, a CUSA. But if any of you have ever had brain surgery, yes, that was actually used in brain surgery, and yes, it did get used on my brother, who had a benign tumor, fortunately, but it did remove his tumor. So being in the medical device industry, I'm intimately aware of how when you do one good thing later, pay it forward, it can come back to you and in ways that you will never imagine. So I undertook studying the grid after I retired in 2022, as Martin told you, but mostly it was I wanted to show that I am invested in climate change. This is an emergency, so I have really thrown myself at this entirely. I may have only been involved for a couple of years, but now, lo and behold, I'm in front of the PUC. I am writing testimony, stuff that I never even heard of before, other than listening to my lawyer wife talk about it. But I'm there, and I'm excited about the possibilities that are coming out now. With what's called the Aggregator Virtual Power Plant, which is a third-party virtual power plant management program that we'll hopefully get into a little bit more as we go. So to give you the executive summary here and the next couple of slides, after you see these, you could probably walk out or something, I suppose. But this is the summary of what we're going to talk about today. And so regardless of, and I'm going to use Boulder as my example. And well, again, going back to my Latin teacher, used to call it, I'll use you as the horrible example. But they're not necessarily that, but they are the example, whether they remain in or out of their franchise with Xcel Energy as their partner. Boulder desires to align their local grid goals, objectives, with their planning, with the planning and execution, and right now there's a disconnect there. Even if their current energy partner, Xcel, meets these net zero grid goals that Boulder has set forth, it will likely miss one or more other objectives, including affordability, for instance, creating gaps. So prosumer, and that is the portmanteau of consumer, producer or producer-consumer here. So prosumers, prosumer-owned distributed energy resources, that's a mouthful again. I'll use the word DERs. If planned and sited and facilitated by a community-based entity like a sustainable energy utility, as contemplated by Ann Arbor, and I'm going to give you a slightly different version, they can play a significant role in filling these gaps. So DERs aggregated in these prosumer-based community virtual power plants, and I'm using this as a placeholder here, is that it's specifically community-based virtual power plant, to empower the community to co-invest in its own grid and meet the community's objectives and goals. Community virtual power plants, including networks of microgrids, are potentially a powerful economic and health and well-being multiplier for the community. I'm going to assume that Boulder, like most Colorado communities, wishes to apply here an objectives and risk-based approach to planning for its future. This is something of a rubric or a framework that I'm familiar with from the medical device industry. Typically it's the 5 steps, waterfall steps, but here you see we've got 6. That's because they always forget the phase 0, where you have to actually come up with what your goals are and do some of the, how are we going to actually plan. So you have to have a process in place. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. I don't know if there's an explicit process like this written down, say in one place for Boulder, but this is one reason why I'm advocating, at least for a sustainable energy utility, to make this transparent and to make it something that everybody can invest in and make it familiar to them all. So hopefully you'll recognize this. This is a sort of universal framework, like I said, for medical devices and grid planning, but even for family housing planning or family financial planning. One probably does something like this. And it doesn't have to be this, in medical device world, it's called a waterfall process, because you go off a cliff and then you invest all of this time in saying, yep, we're done, we're done with that step, so we're just going to keep on moving. It's more concurrent. You will do a lot of the steps at the same time. And so this is the concept, more of an agile concept, if you will, or a concurrent engineering concept, where you're doing things in parallel. And you're constantly feeding back things, lessons, and learn back and forth as you go and as you learn. So it's more of a bottom-up meets top-down paradigm, design paradigm, than say just everybody goes, listens to Excel who says, here's how we're going to do this. But we get some bottom-up participation here and get some bottom-up design to connect those broken connections that we should have. So for reference, this is based on a number of resources, most of them in my head, but you can go look. Berkeley Lab actually came here in April of 2025 and presented Integrated Distribution System Planning 2.0. That's because they had presented one back in 2024 as well. But this one is meant somewhat specifically for Denver because Colorado has engaged in a new distribution system planning process. And so that's the fruits of what we're seeing right now at the PUC going on. So I'm going to offer some a proposed portfolio, if you will, of solutions for a community. Communities like Boulder, like I said, can best align their grid objectives and goals with their planning and execution, like I said, through a sustainable energy utility. I'm saying strategically placed prosumer distributed energy resources like solar plus storage with, and I'm going to emphasize this as well, with bidirectional charging, especially with commercial and industrial, because they're the ones the hardest hit, disproportionately hit, as well as underserved. And this can play a significant role in filling the gaps for these folks in that process in a local and community-oriented way. Community solar plus storage and virtual power plants, or like I said, CVPPs, which are forms of the community-oriented aggregation, empower the community to co-invest in the grid. CVPs, including networks of microgrids as resiliency hubs, are potentially a powerful economic and health and well-being tool. This slide is, again, a busy slide. I understand. We're going to go back to it later at the end of the presentation, but I think the quick 411 is we're going to start simple. Thermostats are a DER. Thermostats can be controlled. We have programs for doing that. As a matter of fact, Arizona has one that they link together mostly commercial and industrial thermostats here we're talking about, and thermal processes. And in that case, they actually had something like on the order of 190 megawatts that they were able to dispatch and avoid a peak during a very hot summer day. Similarly, we're going to talk a little bit about adding more solar plus storage, but again with this vehicle to home, vehicle to load, vehicle to building, if you will, planned in quantity purchases. So again, this is one of the things where you can't compete with utility scale unless you're buying in quantity purchases. We're going to let the community help itself to strategic behind the meter microgrids, and we're going to provide enhanced grid services through community solar plus storage, which is a unique opportunity here in Colorado. Places like Michigan do not have solar plus storage, community solar plus storage in their law, like we do here. And also we have the aggregator, third-party aggregator virtual power plant program. So that's the part where we come into the phase 2 of let's start building those networks and put them together. Again, using the rubric of the objectives, needs, solutions, assessments, grid planning, and execution. I'm going to go through these steps, and I'm going to use Boulder as my example as best I can. In some other places, I'll draw some from other objectives. Does Boulder have objectives? There's a resounding yes. They've had these objectives, I want to say, in some cases since 2006, and in other cases at least since 2016. And you'll recognize these as we go to the next slide, that they are in alignment with what the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, the Power and Energy Society, has recommended for objectives and goals. And I'm paraphrasing this from, there's actually several technical papers that the IEEE PES has put out on this subject. But a modern flexible grid is sustainably equitable, is physically and cyber secure, it is safe, it is reliable, it is resilient, and it is affordable. And this is something that, again, I find I resonate with from the medical device world. This is the minimum bar. This is the threshold to entry into providing utility services. That in the medical device industry, you can't skimp on reliability, you can't skimp on safety, and you can't skimp on efficacy. So all of these things are important, and equity is important as well. I can't stress that enough. But what I also don't want to skip over is this part here, with net zero emissions pollution as soon as practicable for the public health and well-being. Boulder had set, as I said, a net zero electricity goal back in 2016, and they have set their climate, actually they had set their climate initiative here with the screen in the middle as far back as 2006. So they are looking for 2030 to be their net emissions goal, not just electricity, and their net emissions goal of 2035 to be net zero. This is a steep hill, I think you all can see. But Boulder knew this going into 2019, and yet they still declared a climate emergency, and they doubled down in 2021 that they are still going to go after these goals. So needs. Boulder is caught in a perfect storm. Fossil fuel emissions pollution is already affecting our health and economy in Boulder, including causing outages. So I'm drawing from two sources here for that. Boulder has produced a climate impact study of their own, and it is based on a regional assessment of the regional climate in and around Boulder. And you can go look at the bouldercounty.gov climate impacts for that study, and I think it's a pretty novel concept. I don't know how many other cities or counties have done this, but I applaud Boulder for doing this, and I'd like to see more communities engage in this or maybe leverage this for themselves. But the Public Utilities Commission also studied the problem with outages. They studied this just last year in an investigation, and what they found was that the public service outages in 2024 amounted to 350 minutes per customer on average. In Boulder, we had 700 minutes. We're going to talk about that in a second. What that means is the value of the lost load, the potential lost load for businesses who lost power and so forth, is $1.2 billion for the 1.5 million customers in Colorado. And Boulder alone lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 million, but I'm probably underestimating based on those 700 minutes. While Boulder is trying to reduce its emissions during this time, Public Services grid planning and implementation process, I would say, is obviously not keeping up. It is, again, through the public's power shutdowns that we've been experiencing after wind events and so forth. It seems obvious that it's ill-prepared for the increasing weather events to come. It is not modernizing fast enough to meet Boulder's electrification goals. Otherwise, the power would be restored a lot faster. And the grid is aging, centralized, and costly to change. And that's, again, that's a finding from the Public Utilities Commission, not mine. But none of these problems are unique to Boulder. This is something you'll find whether you're in Ann Arbor or in some places in Oklahoma. You're going to find the same problem. So, what are the root causes? I always like to go to root cause analysis. Let's find the simplest root causes. And you know what? I don't think I'm stating anything here that shouldn't be obvious, but fossil fuel emissions pollution is the root cause. It causes more extreme weather events, it causes inequitable health and safety issues, and it's forced us to make costly adaptations and upgrades, things that are more complicated than just powering your toaster back when I was a kid. Number two, we have an aging and centralized grid and planning process through an investor-owned utility. And again, Boulder isn't unique in this regard. This is biased towards firm utility-owned resources. It's slow to innovate and change and neglects customer needs on the grid edge. And again, a lot of this was supported by the Public Utility Commission's findings. So what does closing a coal polluter have to do with the grid and health benefits? Well, first of all, closing it down on the grid certainly is cleaning up our grid, but it also cleans up our local environment. This is a study that was done in Allegheny for the Pennsylvania for the 3 years before and the 3 years after the closing of this coal plant that's pictured here. There were immediate 20% decrease in weekly ER visits for respiratory problems and a 40% decrease in visits for pediatric asthma. I'd say it was pretty dramatic, the change before and after this plant closed. So, electricity holds the key to our net zero. Changing electricity for heating, hot water, and transportation will only meet community goals and objectives if electricity meets those goals and objectives. I'd like to highlight here that, yes, we are making progress, but to get down to a net zero by 2030, this is, I don't know, it's pretty slow. Excel is at about a 45%, some days a little less, some days maybe a little more, but I'm circling here the fact that the 21% is still coal, and that coal, maybe not that relative level of coal contribution, but that contribution is still going to be in the graph here until 2030. Continuing to rely on fossil fuels is more costly, and it raises risk of leaving stranded assets. So, solutions. Do we have some solutions? And what is the scope of the outage problem to meet the needs in this case? And I'm going to talk here now more about the distributed energy resources solutions here that we have at our grid edge, at our homes, at our businesses. And I'm not going to talk so much about some of the other very fascinating, and I am very pro, what do they call it, grid enhancing technologies or advanced conductors or even HVDC like we were just talking about in Bill McKibben, or not, in Mike Nelson's report to come up soon. I'm very excited. I want to hear about those, but we're going to talk about the grid edge for the moment. So what's the problem? The public services whole system outage customer minutes per customer, as you can see, has been steadily rising since 2015. That has reached a level of about 166 minutes-ish in 2023. That skyrocketed in 2024 to 350 minutes. Now remember, this is the average for all 1.5 million customers. Not everybody experienced this the same way. But the SAIDI here, I should say, is the System Average Interruption Duration Index. So it's just the number of minutes per customer. And in this case, the cost of those outages for Colorado customers, which I've testified to before the PUC, amounts to $1.2 billion, as we talked about. And again, I am using resources like the interruption cost estimator from Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and data provided, thankfully, by Warren Wendling of the City of Boulder in his testimony in the Wildfire Mitigation Plan. Originally, Xcel was applying a value of lost load here, this $2.21 per minute per customer, as being, they had a value that was, I think, $1.58 or something like that. But that was for Xcel's entire customer base throughout the U.S. And what Warren pointed out was that, well, that customer base is different here in Colorado, and it's different in Boulder, where we're doing the undergrounding. We need to have something that's a little more targeted. And when you start getting down to that level, to be fair to Xcel here, it's hard to start assigning a really good value for value of lost load in, say, just a particular community that's losing it on a particular feeder. But the key is here, 97% of these outages were caused on the distribution side of the system. And I'm highlighting none were due to renewable resource inadequacy during a windless, cloudy day. And not even due to renewable resource instability, by the way, either. So how does Boulder compare with other regions in the Xcel territory? And here you can see Boulder was number 3 overall in outages in 2024. And that amounted to 700 minutes, and Boulder's average, that dotted line, was pretty close to the same average for the entire system that we just talked about. So this is all something that you can find, again, at the Public Utilities Commission investigation into this, but this is not data that generally you and I can look at, or even your average business owner, even the City of Boulder. So this is something we're depending on Commission staff to investigate for us. So that cost, again, somewhere in the neighborhood of $24 million, again, using the same value of lost load tools that Xcel uses. By comparison, I decided to just take a look at the Energy Information Administration data for the city of Longmont, which has a municipal utility. And again, I'm relying on the fact that the Public Service of Colorado graph here, at least through 2023, mimicked Boulder's graph roughly, but you can see a 5x difference, even though we're geographically located in the same area. So is it all weather? Not so sure. Is it aging? Probably more likely. Is it some other things? Absolutely. So here, let's take a look at that a little bit more in depth. Small businesses and their employees were disproportionately impacted by this, by the way. We've seen, I showed the $24 million here, and I had to do a little bit of a massage here by creating a hypothetical Boulder community, looking at the number of buildings in Boulder. So this is not actually the number of meters, but the output is still roughly consistent, I believe, with what Warren Wendling found for City of Boulder. So I'm gonna stick with this number, and it's an underestimate. But you can see here that the residential, myself included, we lost some ice cream and some fish maybe. Some of us were more harder hit if you have medical devices or if you're depending on your insulin to be refrigerated or any other kinds of things like that. You were obviously harder hit, and incalculably harder hit. But I'd also like to point out that our small businesses and medium to large C&I pretty much bore the brunt of this losses. And so we're talking about Black Belly Restaurant in Boulder who reported that they had to send all of their employees home, and a lot of those employees were not going to get a paycheck and not going to be able to pay for their groceries or things like that. So the ripple effects are big, and those numbers, things like that, aren't included in this estimate. Moreover, small businesses, considering that we just went through COVID, Under the Sun, which is what was a restaurant beneath the Mountain Sun Brewery, just recently closed. Between COVID and all of these outages, they just could not sustain. So this is where I would advocate that we want to look at how to minimize this for these businesses in particular, and for these impacted communities, disproportionately impacted communities in particular. Again, it's a conservative example, and I'm drawing from tools like Renewable Energy Optimization tool, also from NREL, as well as the Interruption Cost Estimator tool from Lawrence Berkeley. So, yes, residential customers must and should prepare in advance, and we do have some resources out there to inform us as how to do it. The first step is have an emergency plan. The other one is build up an emergency kit. The City of Boulder, County of Boulder Disaster Management has put something like that out for us, and I'd point you to that. So is the Red Cross. They also suggest securing food safety, securing transportation, but the last one is one that I found somewhat humorous. Maybe I shouldn't, dark humor. If all else fails, leave your home and go to a friend, neighbor, hotel, or shelter where power outages are not occurring. So it occurred to me, no pun intended, to go to Longmont. But that said, even so, uninterruptible power supplies, say for even just running a small side refrigerator for your medication, and critical devices, are surprisingly not included on the list. So I'd like to recommend, if you haven't heard of that, go look up some uninterruptible power supplies. There's plenty of little ones like that, even for your computer. But even so, all of our well-intended clean energy policies, including ones that are meant to be equitable, can still lead to inequitable access to backup battery or power. Standard battery programs like the Renewable Battery Connect program, which is a virtual power plant, by the way, now available from Excel, do not guarantee backup for medically vulnerable people. So if you would not, I would suggest, or should not join this program unless you have some way of backing up your medical devices or medical equipment. You must seek some kind of exemption. I just learned, I forget, was it yesterday or the day before, days are blurring here, when we were talking about resilience hubs, which I'll talk about next, that there is actually a medical exemption program for getting battery backup for certain qualifying customers with medical issues, and I didn't even know that this existed. It's not very well advertised. I'm putting it out there now, so have a look at that. But in the meantime, I think we need a more planned community involvement in creating resilience hubs, recreating resiliency that could ensure more of the underserved and disproportionately impact are indeed safe in the outages for whatever reason. Not everyone is going to want to go to Boulder's rec center or the Fort Collins rec center during an emergency, maybe even just during when it's incredibly hot outside. They may not feel safe in a place like that. So there may be places that are closer, a church like this, or some other community center that's on site would be a better place. businesses likewise have to plan for these kind of things now, and indeed many insurance companies are requiring this. There's going to be a crisis on getting insurance. But identifying your outage costs is not a trivial problem for most businesses. As you can see here, I've borrowed from the customer damage function tool that NREL has, and it runs in conjunction with the renewable energy optimization tool, so that you can come up with roughly how much optimize your investment in providing your resiliency versus just providing savings. And this is outage information is incredibly important. However, as I just mentioned a little bit earlier, that information isn't really easy to come by. So how do I figure out my outage risk? Excel publishes this outage map here that I have up here, and I also have up here a little slice of, that's my census block information. But this doesn't have, as you can see, all of the information necessary. Even though it says SAIDI up there for the outage information, that is for not for major events. So the 160 minutes you see up there, 158.4 or whatever it is, did not include the power service shutdown. It did not include any of those kind of major event days. And so it's not entirely useful information if you have to go and do your due diligence in finding out how much should I invest in resilience versus just bill savings. So lastly, I think this is all leading up to, well, how did we get here? Frankly, it's in the planning. We have a standard here of 1/10 day per year system resource adequacy, 1/10 day of outage per year system resource adequacy. That is a somewhat universal standard here in the US, but it is not universal around the world at this point. Others are using a multi-metric, shall we call it, approach, where they include value of lost load, among other things. So a centralized and outdated idea of reliability at our grid's edge that we just talked about, it doesn't really take into account what's happening in your neighborhood, how long those outages have been affecting you, and how effective is that undergrounding. That undergrounding is, as Warren Wendling pointed out in his testimony, was actually highly effective and worth 3-4x what it actually cost. So this is a cartoon, by the way, so it's Geek cartoon from a guy named Luc Van Summeren. I would encourage you to go look up his work. He is a community virtual power plant pioneer in Europe. They've been running a virtual power plant community throughout Europe, Ireland, I believe Belgium, and the Netherlands, among other places. And he's showing here that if we turn all of our toasters and charge all of our cars at once, well, then we have to make this really huge transmission system to get all of that power out there for that 5 seconds that you might have, or 2 hours you might have of overlap. And this might be better if we offset it by looking more at the load and offsetting that at the load in the first place. So let's be smarter. Let's be a bit more flexible. Again, these distributed energy resources and virtual power plants that we're talking about offer a robust, locally oriented solution, and I'm not alone in this finding. This finding has been found by the Brattle Group for the state of in a discussion about demand management programs for Excel back in 2022. And the Colorado Energy Office did a study as well called the Deep Decarbonization by 2040 plan or report. And Brattle Group also did another study in 2023 about virtual power plant and the savings available from virtual power plants. And they used Colorado as their example model, or so they took a model actually from the mountain, southern mountain regions to come up with a model for environment for the weather, et cetera, and use that model along with models of virtual power plants around the U.S. to tell us here's a model of where we could save approximately 40 to 60% over gas and other options. I want to point out that the this study by the Colorado Energy Office was looking at the 100% clean electricity in the last few percent specifically. So what they were suggesting was the base plan is the current plan to go net zero by 2050. The ideal would be, let's see if we can move that up a decade to 2040. How much would it cost to get that last 3 or 4% that Excel is projecting, and of eliminating that last 3 or 4% of gas? This report was saying it was on par with nuclear. I think I'm hoping some of you don't laugh out too loud too much about that, but obviously wind, solar, and so forth are available tomorrow. Nuclear is not going to be available anytime. We'll be lucky if it's available by 2040, and I'm not even sure it would be worth the cost. Hydrogen and geothermal, they have the promise of being less expensive, but in the embodiment that they were discussing in their report, I'd say most of us would agree that these technologies are still unproven, and it's not clear that they would actually reach our market by 2040. So that's why I'm saying distributed energy resource, solar storage, managing your thermostats, managing your hot water heaters, that's stuff that's available now that can be rolled out, and they can provide added value to the grid of reliability and resilience, especially when these are well planned and placed. So keeping the electrons local, focusing on disproportionately impacted commercial and industrial, strategically planned in place, these can all be an economic multiplier. Solar plus storage versus gas. So I've had this suggested to me a couple of times. Well, why don't you just get a gas backup generator? I could. The cost of a gas backup generator would be not all that bad. That said, a gas backup generator and a transfer switch make no sense if I'm trying to get some extra squeeze some extra time of use savings out of my solar. Adding a battery, getting that synergy, solar charged batteries with the transfer switch can be used for the resilience and time of use or demand charge peak savings if you're commercial. But the kicker here that I wanted to emphasize is, and this is drawn from a study that I'll mention here momentarily by Lawrence Berkeley. The kicker is that you usually, at least in residential cases, and maybe in some commercial and industrial cases, you may be able to downsize that battery investment and rely on your car instead as a backup during those periods. This is something that I have made sure I double checked with City of Boulder. Yes, you can use your car as a backup with a bidirectional charger. The cost, the incremental cost is the bidirectional charger cost. You already have to have the transfer switch and all of these other good things in place. So vehicle to home or vehicle to building can reduce the size of that battery and provide that resilience. And the kicker is that can be converted later to managed community virtual power plants. So what did Lawrence Berkeley say specifically about this in evaluating? They have a long-running program here on this and a lot of papers, but one of the most recent was our results suggest that bidirectional EV charging may be essential to enabling backup of heating and cooling, again in residential or perhaps in some small business use cases, given their typically large kilowatt hour size. Now this example, I'm a really bad drawer or artist, so I'm using an example that I borrowed from the web. That said, this is a really instructive graph. Ember has done a recent study on utility scale solar plus battery to see can we achieve 24/7 solar enabled, if you will, power. And here they're saying 1 kilowatt of power can be produced by a combination of a 17.5 kilowatt hour battery with 5 kilowatts of utility scale solar. So you get 24 kilowatt hours of power. So you're charging when you have that slashed area there is used to charge the battery up while you're also providing the 1 kilowatt. And then as the sun goes down and we're getting less sun, now we're relying more and more on the battery. The battery can handle the rest of this. This is the same principle as for your home. So the quick 411 on that, they said 5 kilowatts for a solar system in Las Vegas. Just so you don't have to go look it up, I looked it up for you. It's about a 20% difference here in Boulder, so you'd need about 20% more. So maybe a 6 or 7 kilowatt system instead would cover the same in Colorado. I applied some of these same principles and went back and used the REopt and PV Calc tools. I don't recommend that you go and take this information and use it today, because I'm still working with University of Colorado Leeds School on coming up with a handy spreadsheet that even a small business owner could understand, or at least my junior finance major who I have working on this. But here we see an example of where we have a solar system only, and in our previous example, our small business is losing $1,500 a year on average in outages. And obviously the solar has no backup, so I'm just losing that money every year, or at least on average. Solar plus a 13 kilowatt storage backup would be good enough for at least close to an overnight, or better than overnight, 10 plus hours if you will. So that gets me about 600, cuts that out by about $660 for longer events than 10 hours. But it's going to take me 16 years to pay this system off. Not very good. So I'm going to take advantage of that per Lawrence Berkeley and say, well, let's try a TOU. And I use PV Calc with our new time of use savings that we have coming up. And in this case, I could save roughly $200 or more per year. And in this, but I only have about 2 hours or 3 hours, if you will, of battery that might be available during an outage. So I'm not saving quite as much. I'm only saving $140 per year. So battery with vehicle. This is where I found the kicker. Now we get, I can endure up to a day or longer event with that. If there's no sun at all, if there's some sun, I could just go on indefinitely. And I'm looking at least $1,300 a year in savings on my or my value of resilience, if you will, for my business. So going on to assessments, meeting and aligning our objectives and goals. What is a sustainable energy utility, and why am I advocating for this? A sustainable energy utility is the community-based model of development founded on energy conservation and the use of renewables. I won't read the rest of the slide. You can go look some of this up with the Ann Arbor model. And this is taken from Wikipedia, sorry, but as a matter of fact, I couldn't find a better source for summarizing this than Wikipedia. And no, I don't rely on ChatGPT or any of those newfangled things. I don't want to use up the power. I don't want to add to the data center problem. In other words, I'll be non-oblique. But it could be patterned at a local distribution level after our own Colorado Electric Transmission Authority. If you're not familiar with this group, this is a region or authority that is sort of a facilitator, planner, procurer for all of the utilities in the state of Colorado. So it's acting on behalf of the state in our transmission planning, because right now we have something in the neighborhood of 55 plus utilities, all with separate planning and all with separate needs. So CETA is meeting that, including funding. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, so these are some examples of sustainable energy utilities you can look at. Again, I'm not going to go read through all of these. The highlight that I'd like to make is that where sustainable energy utility started was in Delaware with Professor John Byrne and others at the University of Delaware, and there still is a long-running program there with Energize Delaware. It's come under different names. That has been sort of a green bank and a funder and facilitator, if you will, for renewable energy. It is self-sustaining, and that's a key. We were looking at a model that's a self-sustaining model. And Ann Arbor, most recently, is the one that comes to mind here, because you can see the dates, maybe 2014 is the last time anybody did anything on this. So Ann Arbor is paving the way, but I'd like to see us start doing that here in Colorado as well. So what is the common theme, the paradigm shift here that we're talking about? And this is directly from Byrne and Company. From carbon-intensive energy sources to carbon-free energy sources, from viewing energy as a commodity to viewing energy as a service provision. And this is also a theme when it comes to virtual power plants. We're looking at services, not just the commodity of electricity. From supply-oriented energy architectures to demand-oriented energy architectures. Get that out to the grid edge. Get some grid independence. And from a centralized energy system overall to one that's more of a distributed energy infrastructure. And as an engineer, that resonates with me. I prefer distributed architectures over centralized. Do we have programs like that here in Boulder, for instance, or in Colorado? Yes, but this is not an SEU. These are sort of, I'd hesitate to call them ad hoc because they really have thought this out and they really have tried to put this together. But it's not all under one roof. Things like Switch Together will get you financing, but it's not necessarily at a lower government rate like the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority is offering, for instance, and like an SEU could offer. And these aren't necessarily, especially the Switch Together program. You will get quantity buys, yes, at lower prices, yes, but you may not get, this may not be going to everybody who actually needs it. It's going to people who can afford it. So I'm not going to go too far into this here because this is probably more Boulder minutia, but the University of Ann Arbor did do a study on the options available to cities, especially cities like Ann Arbor that cannot municipalize. And what they found that they could meet all of their goals without fully jettisoning the private utility model by and this was faster to reach those goals rather as opposed to trying to get more municipalities to link together or tightening the regulation in existing utility regulations. So this is the rubric that Schreiberg and team came up with. As you can see, a lot of the goals are shared with what our goals are here, regarding climate, reliability, energy justice, affordability, and in this case, sustainable energy utilities came out on top. One of the, we discussed this a bit with Mike Freiberg, and I encourage you to give him a call if you're interested. He's a great guy and very willing to help out here in Colorado. But one of the things that, again, that they don't have, that we have, in addition to already having virtual power plants, is the community solar plus storage concept. That is where community members can go through a power purchase agreement or something like that. I think I'm in the Solar Connect program where Pivot Energy has a solar facility, I think it's out near Greeley, that I am taking advantage of. It's a few bucks, but at least I'm co-invested with Pivot Energy in providing some bill savings for me and some energy for everybody else. And that's part of the community idea of this. So again, to go quickly over what virtual power plants are, I want to say that the distributed energy resources, the DERs here, are a lot more wide than you might even think and wider than what you might even picture here. For instance, we have hot water heaters here or thermostats here, But I would add to that, there's even things like smart insulation now, or smart window shading, things of that nature that are coming around that all can be controlled by your smart home. And coordinating these things so that they make sense for the utility as well as save you money are both, that's a win-win kind of situation. And that's what we're after here ultimately. And I also want to point out that I think it was incorrect that the original Department of Energy or document here, which has now been taken down, by the way, had customers here blankly. These are not customers. These are prosumers. These are people willing to co-invest in their utility market. They are producer consumers. They are trying to help. They're the ones you want behind your back in these kind of things. So we want to encourage this. We want to make this. We want to make this take off. So to investigate it a little bit more, what is the difference between where our traditional consumer model is, which is more like every house just looks like a toaster as far as the grid utility operator is concerned, and they just charge you for that one blank dollar value, or in this case euro value from Luke Van Summeren here, by the way, for your electrons that you're burning up and in the atmosphere here, I guess. And then there's the lone prosumer down here who's bought a solar panel. It's not coordinated, it's not controlled, but they are offsetting it. Maybe they've got net metering right now. They're about to get a surprise when the new time of use net billing rates come out. But right now they're happy, and they don't need necessarily the energy community, but the energy community is filled with people who can't afford these panels and can't afford this. And so this is where, again, community solar comes into play. But what if we widen that theater? What if we involve these folks now who are bringing their car, bringing their home energy management systems, bringing their battery, bringing their solar, bringing their hot water heater into play? Can we mix all of those together, mix and match? Fred has a solar panel and Betty does not, so let's share. Betty has a battery maybe, or maybe she's got a car. She can contribute with the car during a blackout perhaps, or maybe some other reason. But this is all kind of things that we would want to see in the community model. So the value proposition, again, 40 to 60% savings over traditional utility scale investments. This is a busy slide. I'll have you just go look at it a lot later. But I think it's hitting on more of the wide range. We've talked about affordability again, and we've talked about reliability and resilience. We talked about versatility, resource adequacy, all of these things, and virtual power plants are a flexible tool that can be changed and altered in all sorts of ways to provide not just savings to the prosumer, but value to the grid and to the community at large. So what's an example of one? And again, and I'm going to use the Arizona public service example here of a thermostat smart home VPP. It's more than that because it involved a lot of commercial and industrial partners, and that's something that right now we only have I want to say there's just maybe it's like Peak Partners and some other programs that Excel has, but those aren't arranged into a virtual power plant that can benefit all the rest of us as well. So this is what's very interesting, that they were able to dispatch 190 megawatts in 2023 during a very hot day. And so they avoided what would have been a record peak day. And that's equivalent to 38,000 homes here in Boulder. And they enrolled over 90,000 thermostats in this program. And they leveraged their existing demand response system to do this. So, in summary, community virtual power plants, they can be tailored to meet your local objectives and goals. They can provide localized resilience exactly where it's needed. They can provide unique flexibility and stabilization services. They can be deployed and innovated upon quickly, and they can save all grid participants money. And again, going to a community solar, Senate Bill 24-207, and I believe the latest PUC is called the Renewable Energy Source Plan, or RES. That plan is supposed to include some of what we're going to do with community solar plus storage. So I'm hoping that that's going to turn out better than it has. Right now it's very limited in terms of the pay, but basically, again, it's community members all co-investing and sharing in their power. There is a study, and I'm trying to remember, this is from NREL, discussing exactly what the potential savings are of widespread community solar plus storage. I believe, though, that or community solar, I'm sorry, they did not include storage in this study. Storage would probably be a doubler, if not a tripler, of the synergies involved here. Yes, we have some of these here in Colorado and available to folks in whether you're in Netherland or Jack Solar Garden, good agrivoltaics example. But we have these examples, and this is something where the disproportionately impact or low to middle income can participate at much reduced rates, in some cases for free. And again, it's subscriber funded and self-sustaining. I'm going to rush through a few of these on the grid planning. Grid planning is complicated and expensive, but this is where a devoted community sustainable energy utility can come in and help. Again, there's, as you can see from this chart, this is actually from the training materials that I talked about earlier from Lawrence Berkeley National Labs on distribution system planning, but you'll notice there's all sorts of interconnecting steps and plans, and some of this is concurrent and some of it's, so it's not all waterfall. So the community and local authorities should play, or should be able to play, a critical role in this, especially in advocating for their local distribution system. So after defining your goals and objectives, you do a needs assessment, and this is where a formal structure like an SEU can come into play. And again, this is borrowed from standard training materials on this. I want to thank Ron Sinton for putting me onto the Whisker Labs and their Ting sensor network, and specifically this cool graphic, which at first you may not recognize what this means. Total harmonic distortion, what does that mean? That means the power is flickering on and off, and so you're getting some crud on your voltage and on your frequency of your system, and it can be measured with total harmonic distortion. And consistently, at least since I heard about this, I've been watching this for about a year and a half now, or a year or so. It appears that Xcel is the number 2 or number 3 typically worst performing in the U.S. on THD, and that is because of our outage problems primarily. So where is this happening? The blue areas here in this little pull-out map that I have are roughly individual Ting sensors or groups of them. The blue areas are, hey, they're honky-dory. The yellow, not so good. The red is bad. And I will point out that red area is my home. We got some bad stuff going on at my home, apparently. So this is where something like involving the community in general can be helpful. This information, by the way, could be made available from Xcel's data. Xcel does collect this data. Xcel does have this information, again, like we talked about earlier on the slides and on your outage data. They do not share this. And we'll get into that here in a second. So public service, like I said, number 1 worst performer. So this is where community and aggregated DERs placed in these red areas can help relieve some of the stress and congestion and instability on our system. This ugly spaghetti thing here is what's called a hosting capacity analysis map. What you would do with this, if you're living in or if you're an aggregator or a community solar panel operator, you would be looking at a much better version of this, and I'll show you in a second, of where to place your opportunities to place your community solar or even your virtual power plant to see if you can help relieve the congestion, etc. What's a couple of the problems to point out: number one, this is blurred, obviously, and this was because of physical security concerns that Xcel has for revealing too much about their network. But there's also 20% of this map is missing. In this case, one of the neighborhoods right 3 or 4 blocks north of me, their entire neighborhood is missing from this map, and that is because they are under what's called the 15-15 rule. Some obscure stuff, I won't go into it. Boulder is fighting it right now, but this is information that at least at your site, at your personal customer site, you should be given. And I am working with the PUC and with Xcel as best I can on this. We are going to get our hosting capacity. Customers will be alerted of their host capacity, feeder host capacity capabilities. If they're in one of these areas that is a hot spot, you will be notified. So we've got that much through. But contention for a map that looks more like this one. This is from, if I were a resident in Portland, Maine, I could know down to my house what the host capacity. Now, one thing that's unique about this too, this is not just host capacity. So this is meaning generation. How much generation could I put on there? There's also load capacity as well as included in this. So there's a complicated integration of those two in here. And again, Xcel has detailed maps like this. Right now, they want you to sign away your first child for it, and this is up for grabs right now in the aggregator virtual power plant at the PUC. But this is the kind of map that our aggregators here in Colorado are looking for. So, to summarize, the ideal SEU characteristics: provide residential and commercial grade energy and resilience audits and recommendations, supplement integrated distributed system planning and implementation directly on behalf of the community. And by that I mean focus on the needs of the disproportionately impacted, the commercial and industrial, transportation, etc. Facilitate strategic community solar plus storage and microgrids. Offer simple ways to finance at lower rates for energy efficiency, electrification, solar and battery, etc. Provide savings on utility costs through unique business models and be self-sustaining. I'm going to rush through a few of these examples here because we do have some in Colorado, but it's still an emerging paradigm. However, the pictures here you'll see of the Community Lighthouse Project in New Orleans is a unique one. They survived the Hurricane Francine by planting well-planned, I should say, network of resiliency hubs. So before I get into where they did this, what is a resiliency hub? A resiliency hub is a community serving facility that is enhanced to support residents and offer services and resources on the daily basis, as you see. So this is going to have power. This is going to have emergency response, if you will. But at a community level, these can be tailored. We don't all have to be first responders, and we don't all have to buy into the whatever is going on at the rec center. That's necessary at the rec center. That's necessary at Boulder's critical infrastructure. But it's not necessarily for a church like this. A church like this could be a resiliency hub, already is serving a lot of the community purposes like that. So, forwarding quickly, this is not a war game or a role-playing game here. This is actually their initial idea of where to look for placing their resiliency hubs, and they look for communities of faith, private nonprofits and other private enterprises that would be interested in joining this, and the yellow dotted map is where they ended up. And lo and behold, they did survive Hurricane Francine. These have been, now they are been allowed to aggregate as into a community virtual power plant, and they're allowed to export battery to the grid. I think this is a huge leap forward for New Orleans, and we're going to try to get them here and talk to them a little bit more. closest example we have, for instance, like I've been saying, community centers like this one in Fort Collins. But a cautionary tale here. When we're talking microgrids, I'm talking about microgrids that are mostly single meter or single premises. I'm not talking about trying to link a whole neighborhood up. And here's the cautionary tale. I forget if it was, this is a report on KQED, but I'm trying to remember UC Berkeley. Thank you. UC Berkeley tried to do bulk buys, like our Switch Colorado, and convert an entire whole neighborhood all at once. And would they save money? Yes, they would save money on this. But 15 out of the 25 neighbors, even when this was offered to them for free, did not wish to participate. That's just the reality. Some of them were much more comfortable with their gas stove. So again, if you're going to start a microgrid, that's one thing when you're talking about just your house. It's a whole other thing when you're trying to link together an entire neighborhood. We need to be sensitive to the needs of these other folks, and not disparage them. They're your neighbors. But we can still provide the services through aggregations of these smaller microgrids, nanogrids. We can provide services to our neighbors, even to their benefit in lowering their rates. So again, I went over what our framework was. I went over the root causes. I went over what our objectives are. I outlined what an ideal SEU might look like, and I've outlined what community virtual power plants, can do for our neighbors. And so that's the portfolio that I've proposed. And again, going back to the final picture, hopefully now it makes more sense. Starting simple, deploying what we've got strategically, and then networking it all together. And to learn more about resilience hubs, I'm going to invite you, put in a shameless plug here for an upcoming Empower Hour event that we have on September 30th, presented by our team on resilience hubs. So thank you. I am a avid runner, so for me, when someone says spike up, it's go time. Put on your game face, and I think we need to get going. So net zero equals health zero. Let's go.